What's up? Welcome into the Irish Huddle podcast. It's Wednesday, October 7th, 2020. It's game week for the first time in what feels like decades. Notre Dame hosting Florida State, which is 0-2 in the ACC. And I don't know, Lou, 25 years ago, this would have had everyone's attention in the country, been on primetime, I guess, like it is now. But I mean, even in this upcoming slated games where two conferences aren't even playing, it just kind of seems to barely register a ripple, kind of like the last game did, right?
You're just thankful and hopeful that the game is going to be played because, yeah, we do say it's game week, but with the way everything is these days, you don't know if on Thursday or Friday or even Saturday, somebody just suddenly says, oops, something went wrong here, game off. So you're just thankful to have any game at this point. At least I am.
Yeah,
Patrick.
I mean, I think that's worth
That's,
acknowledging.
that's the kind of season it is. You saw it with North Carolina. They just played their second game last week because they had a 3-week lull as well. So um, you just take what you can get.
I'm going to acknowledge that because it's absolutely true. But at the same time, I'm still going to gripe. I don't really know what the ACC was thinking when it decided to go with this one over Miami. And obviously, I don't think anyone, not even me, who was higher on Miami, saw the start that they have gotten off to. But nonetheless, certainly this game heading into it doesn't carry the kind of allure and national title implications on both sides of the Notre Dame Florida State meetings of old and before I was born, at least.
Yeah. And it was kind of like that 2 years ago, too, Patrick, when Florida State came in here and Notre Dame was vying at that time for the playoff, which they eventually did make. But it was mid-November, one of the coldest days I can recall in Notre Dame Stadium. I think that has to end where you have these night games in November, mid-November at Notre Dame. This week it's going to be a lot different. From what I understand, it's going to be up to about 77 degrees. So from that angle, that's not going to be a problem. Now, at night, it might get down to the 50s or so, but I don't think climate plays a factor at all in this game. It's going
No,
to be
you can
what's between the ears.
be very thrilled, and you can guarantee that Florida State is thrilled to read that weather report. And they threw us a bone with that December Syracuse game. They announced that's an afternoon game, thank God, because why would you ever put that thing at night in December? But anyway, I digress. You guys can follow us on Twitter at Patrick Engel _. It's ENGEL. And you can follow Lou at BGI _ Lou Somogyi, SOMOGYI. If you're not subscribed to blueandgold.com, what are you waiting for? And if you haven't subscribed to the podcast, well, what are you waiting for? Please rate, review, subscribe. If you're watching on YouTube, like this video, hit that thumbs up button, and subscribe to our YouTube channel. And please leave us a nice review if you do indeed like what you guys have heard from us today and however long you've been listening. So let's dive into Florida State and really what to know about this team that seems like it's heading down the track of being very similar to the disappointing and at times dysfunctional teams since 2016. I mean, they're on the third coach since the start of the 2017 season. Has not been any better or any better a start yet, at least. I mean, I don't want to rush to conclusions and think, oh, Mike Norvell is a terrible hire after 3 games of this really weird season. But if nothing else, I don't really think that beating Jacksonville State, an FCS team like Florida State did last week, was going to erase the 0-2 start and the horror that was that Miami loss and the barf-inducing opener loss against Georgia Tech. It was 16-13, but I think it matters a little bit. I mean, just because you're not coming in completely battered after a rough ACC game, and at least right now they think they have found an answer at quarterback, and that's Jordan Travis. He's a redshirt sophomore, transferred from Louisville before the 2019 season. He led all the scoring drives in a 41-24 win, I should say, over Jacksonville State. Dual threat type of guy. When he was in the 3 games last year, threw 11 passes compared to 23 carries. More even pass run distribution in his very small sample size at Louisville, and had 48 yards on the ground against Jacksonville State. That's all rushing yards. No sacks thrown in there for whatever reason. The NCAA loves to includes sacks in rushing yards. If I ever have my way, I will change that. It's the first move I'll make if I'm ever commissioner of college football. So you have some kind of ground element at the quarterback position, but more importantly for them, I think, however short-lived it may or may not be, some type of confidence boost or semblance of an answer at quarterback.
Yeah. Well, one thing that can usually galvanize a team, especially that's experienced the setbacks that it has, is getting that answer at quarterback. A few things kind of settle into a routine, like knowing that, okay, this is our guy at quarterback, and not having that specter of doubt hover over you. Now, that was one game against an FCS team. You're on the road now against one of the better defenses in the country as well, and one of the top coordinators with Clark Lee. There's some sample size now of game tape as well. There isn't necessarily the element of surprise. And the reality is you're still dealing with a program that, if there's one area where they have been extremely lacking for all the recruiting rankings, and over the last 4 years per Rivals, from 2017 through 20, Florida State's recruiting classes have been number 5, number 10, number 17, number 20, which is very comparable to Notre Dame. And some would say even slightly better with having that top 5 and top 10 class as well. But where they've really been woefully short is along the offensive line. For example, that number 5 ranked class from 4 years ago, there were 23 guys in it. There was only one offensive lineman. It reminds me a little
Not
bit
good.
of a lot of the Charlie Weiss classes at Notre Dame, where there was some tremendous star power, especially at the skill positions, whether it was a Michael Ford or a Jimmy Clausen, Armando Allen, Robert Hughes. But on the defensive side of the ball, it was lacking. So you go by recruiting rankings mainly by the star power, but not by the balance and overall continuity that creates a strong roster. And, last year they gave up 48 sacks. Previous year they were 111th in the country, gave up 39 sacks. This year against Miami, Florida on September 26th, that in the first half alone, they gave up 5 sacks and 9 tackles for lost yardage. From left tackle through center, it's all sophomores. Now, I don't know if there's been injuries or other health setbacks, but they've had to rely on a graduate transfer from Florida International to kind of help salvage and put together the line at right tackle. Now, when did we expect the day to see, oh my gosh, thank God we got a transfer from Florida International at Florida State to round out the line? So that's been their trouble area. You look at their defense, it's replete with 5-star and 4-star players, top 200, top 100 players. But again, just not finding that collective cohesion. And that's where the program has been one of the most underachieving in the country over the last 3-4 years.
How many college football fans, or maybe not say diehards or reporters like us who cover it, do you think if you asked them just about Florida International, how many of them do you think would get that confused with an airport?
Very, very well done. Yeah.
Yeah, but probably a lot, right? I mean, I don't know. It's a relatively new team. It's in the Conference USA, right? And but the point being, this is where Florida State's at, where a lineman from there, which I mean, I not any knock on the guy or the team. It's actually been pretty good of late, but this is just where they're at. I mean, they're starting a guy who is starting for a Conference USA team that you might think is an airport. So yeah, not it's they just haven't been very good at blocking anybody for a few years now, and it really is at the root of a lot of their problems.
Yeah, and you had one of the top running backs in the country in Cam Akers, their second round pick last year, and he did gain over 1,000. But again, they were just not able to produce in a lot of the marquee type games. It's sort of like you can pad the stats here now against Jacksonville State, but ultimately you're measured by how you do with your peers. And when Florida State opened for the fourth straight year with a loss at home, they're
I
opening
didn't know
home
that.
to Georgia Tech, which was in the preseason, it was ranked 15th out of 15 teams in the ACC. They're still in a state of flux from going back from their triple option days just 2 years ago. But you lose at home 16-13 and then just lay an egg on national television against one of your top rivals. You're down 38-3 at halftime. You give up touchdowns on each of the first 5 possessions to Miami. And I still recall Kirk Herbstreit last year after the Miami and Florida State game. He just expressed absolute disgust with Florida State by saying that all they do is chirp. They talk a good game. They like to strut and all, but there's nothing to back it up because there is tremendous individual talent there. Brian Kelly talked about 6, 7 first-day picks. Now that's a tad exaggerated, but
I'd
there's
be
a
very
lot of
surprised.
there's a
I bet a lot of
lot
money
of
that doesn't
NFL
happen.
talent. I mean, Patrick, you go through that defensive line. You have 5-star players who were ranked in the top 5 nationally overall as players by rivals. Marvin Wilson in the interior, and then their end as well. You had Joshua Kondo. You have a top 100 player there with Janarius Robinson. Robert Cooper was top 200 player. You're not going to see 5 lines probably in college football on the defensive side with that much on paper talent. And then you got one of the best corners in Asante Samuels. You have a stud linebacker in Amari Greener. But it's just baffling to see what's become of that program, and just shows how culture and infrastructure matter.
So I want to touch on the quarterback situation again with them, and finding a seemingly the answer, or at least what they think, against an FCS team is all right. It is what it is, but it's a lot better than the alternative, right? Of losing to an FCS team and still coming into this game wondering, all right, what the hell are we doing at quarterback? So at least you have that, but at the same time, when you consider and look at what Jordan Travis was able to do against Jacksonville State, I think still kind of have to remember and temper expectations a little bit. Of he still only played a little bit of football, and he initially lost the job, and it even was third string. He's the third starter this year. And look, it's a first-year coach. You can assume that they held a competition as best they could in this weird summer camp, and that James Blackman, I know he's started a lot of games, but I mean, watch him play in the past. It's not like he's got some iron grip on the job here. He initially won the nod and started the first two games. And against Jacksonville State, they rolled out a Tate Rodemaker, I believe he's a true freshman,
Yes.
before Travis had to replace him. So, and maybe it's just one of those things where you get it, they got it wrong, or just something happened, or this weird camp didn't allow for someone to fully shine. I don't really know, but I think that has to matter, and just is kind of at least a footnote, or maybe even more than a footnote, I should say, that of when you consider, oh, it's going to be a thing that just completely takes off under this guy. I I think it's pretty clear that at least right now he's the best of the options. But to see something, if you told me right now that this is going to be something that just completely goes up and better and makes them an offensive force, and they don't have another dud game, I wouldn't believe that, and I would push back on that a lot.
Well, they fell behind to Jacksonville State 14-0. So he came in with genuine game pressure. Let me tell you, if Florida State loses to Jacksonville State, there's plenty of pressure around everyone. So he comes in and leads 5 consecutive touchdown drives. So at least there was that element of belief that he instilled in the team, if nothing else. And like I said earlier, there's few things in football that can galvanize a unit more than the knowledge that, okay, we're set at quarterback. There's no controversy. There's no debate. This is who our guy is. We worried about that a couple of years ago when Notre Dame was 3-0, yet still replaced the starter, Brandon Wimbush, with Ian Book, who they felt had a higher ceiling. So that was a little bit worrisome too. And that, why are you disrupting the apple cart here? I mean, if it's not broke, don't fix it, etc.
Well, that was broke. That was broke.
Well, it may have been, but
beyond the record, at least. Yeah.
Yeah. But Brandon Wimbush had done a good job the previous year, faltered at the end, and without him, they don't win that Michigan game in the 2018 opener as well, because of so much inexperience at all the other skill positions. They had to lean on him. But with here, it's hard to say yet, because this wasn't Michigan that they defeated. This was Jacksonville State. Now you come in facing a salty Notre Dame defense led by one of the top coordinators in the country with Clark Lee. And this becomes like the true measure of, was that a flash in the pan, or is this something that they can build on for the long term?
Here's how I think that we'll be talking about this, and how Florida State fans and folks who cover it will be discussing it, is that they're going to say he was fine at best, if not just bad because the whole team was bad, because this is a tough game. And I kind of look at this a little bit like the Bears quarterback conundrum with Mitch Trubisky and Nick Foles. I think there's some kind of similar things for how that played out, where, okay, you put in Nick Foles, he delivers a bunch of scoring drives and hope against a bad team, a bad defense, and you think, oh, this is great. But even then, and certainly now after they've played a game, a reminder that it's not going to be a linear thing, like I said, where, all right, so first start, get a little bit of optimism, whatnot, and the offense is terrible. The Bears offense is terrible. They put up 3 points until garbage time. Just not good. Nothing redeemable whatsoever. And that's a game against a much better defense and a better team than the Falcons when you initially got the wind in your sails and saw the problem. It's kind of the same thing here at Florida State, right? Where, okay, you save yourself from a bad loss, or even a narrow, skin of your teeth win that wouldn't have been at all inspiring. And then you go into a tough game here against a good defense. I would be surprised if it's one of those things where, okay, it strains Notre Dame's defense for 60 minutes, or they're not dictating this thing all around. I kind of think it's going to have a similar arc to that, where Florida State is leaving that game humbled and not having been able to really do much against Notre Dame's defense.
Yeah, and Brian Kelly said that they're not just preparing for one quarterback. They know that I don't think they want to get into a game of musical quarterbacks at Florida State, especially when you're trying to establish a program here. But
I think you give Travis the leash the entire time. I don't really see you've kind of settled on this, right? I don't see much point in flipping it around or into someone else after 4 drives with no points or something like that.
Yeah, and it's going to be hard to win back James Blackman in the same way it was going to be.
Benchings are not things you take, like, and again, with the Bears, once you bench Trubisky, you can't come back. Or it's not like a thing where, coming back there next weekend, you're good. And this is a guy who started games 4 years ago, got benched. It's not like, oh, hey, be ready, you're good, you can do your job again, nothing happened. It's not really how it works. But all right, that's enough on the uninspiring, to put it lightly, offense. Well, you touched on the defense earlier, and the defensive line in particular. And here's kind of the thing that, in a way, has summed it up. Marvin Wilson, probably an early first-round pick. Corey Durden, high-round prospect at this point at defensive tackle next to Marvin Wilson. These are good players, all ACC-level players. They have 1 combined tackle for loss or sack in 3 games, and that was Wilson against Jacksonville State. So nothing in the ACC games. So you're just not getting disruption and big plays out of the guys you count on them for. And it's completely against even last year with Marvin Wilson. You have 44 tackles in 9 games for a nose tackle. That's insane. And of course, 8.5 tackles for loss. Like you'd see, he had 5 sacks for that position. That's really good. And overall, it just kind of embodies what their defense has done. They have some dudes back there, and their havoc rate and what that is percentage of plays where you get a pass defended, so an interception or a pass breakup, a tackle for loss or a sack, or a forced fumble. In 3 games, it's 15%. In a normal year, at least going back on the data we have for havoc rate, it kind of went away a little bit last year. It's part of Bill Connolly's SP+. 15% will put you in the 80s out of 130 FBS teams. It's not good. And it's not like it's a thing where you're deprived of guys who can win one-on-ones and get impact plays and put you behind the sticks as an offense. They're giving up 6 yards of play. It's just bad defense. And I guess it's worth also mentioning here, they haven't had a safety, Hamza Nasir-al-Din, only safety in college football last year to get Pro Football Focus grades of at least 80 in run defense, coverage, and tackling. Mike Norvell wasn't particularly forthcoming, or I'm not sure we're going to see him this weekend. He was
on the depth chart. He was listed, but we know how it works sometimes with depth chart as far as gamesmanship.
Usually by October, depth charts you just don't even bother reading them. Especially this year, where we're not going to know about coronavirus-related absences until an hour and a half before the game. But yeah, it's not much better on defense for Florida State right now, and maybe that's even more disappointing. I mean, you knew you had an offensive line problem. I don't think Mike Norvell would have thought that early on, at least, they just struggled to get impact plays in quantities you need them out of their best players. And like you said, Joshua Kendo, he missed the first 2 games, but still, it's that if they're going to beat Notre Dame, they've got to get more than just a couple tackles for loss here. You're just not going to stop them.
Yeah, and that's going to be probably the most intriguing matchup, is because the Notre Dame offensive line, which is one of the most veteran-laced units in the country and in school history, against a senior-dominated Florida State defensive line as well, including a fifth-year senior. And then, it was a bit of a surprise that Marvin Wilson even came back for his senior year because he was projected as a high-round pick as well. Getting, Joshua back for the Notre Dame game after missing the first two ACC games, that might present some problems there, but it's a matchup of big on big. Both of those units are just laden with experience, seasoning. Robert Cooper, their nose guard, is 332 pounds. I mean, he can be a problem inside. So that's going to be one of the more intriguing matchups there in the trenches, because you're truly, in the literal and figurative sense, are looking at big on big.
Trivia question. Speaking of Joshua Kando, top 5 overall player. Do you know where he was committed before Florida State? I'll give you a hint. It's not somewhere you would think is getting top 5 players.
No, I don't remember that one.
Okay, he's committed to Maryland. Maybe fun fact. Yeah, from Maryland.
There were a lot of players committed to Maryland back then.
Yeah, you could field an all decommit team from Maryland of some pretty good dudes. But yeah, anyway, useless information for all you recruiting fans out there. So let's talk about matchups.
Rivals had him as the number 2 overall prospect in the country that year, and Wilson was number 5. I mean, my gosh, could you imagine if Notre Dame landed in a specific year 2 of the top 5 defensive linemen in the country, both ranked in the national top 5?
Yeah, that'd be, I don't know, maybe a little bit of a big deal, just a little.
Would that set the message board off a little bit?
Yeah, I think they'd stop complaining. I don't know. Everybody would find a way to blame it on Jeff Quinn. Mm-hmm. Some things never change. But anyway, let's talk about some of those matchups, like you mentioned. But first, we're going to take a quick timeout. So, Lou, we've spent, the last 25 minutes or whatever it was, almost as if dunking on Florida State for their struggle. But I don't think this is really quite a thing where you can look at every single position and say, oh, yeah, Notre Dame's better there. Notre Dame's better there. Notre Dame's better there. I mean, I know we haven't seen the production from them, but Florida State's interior line, if you gave me the choice of theirs and Notre Dame's, I'd take Florida State's. I would probably take the receivers at this point. I mean, just because what we haven't seen out of Kevin Austin because he hasn't played, what we haven't seen out of Braden Lindsey because he's been limited or missed some games, and obviously there's lack of production from that spot in particular. And Florida State, despite its passing game struggles, Tamorrion Terry, all ACC player, averaged almost 20 yards a catch last year with that inconsistent quarterback play, almost 1,200 yards. Deep threat, averaged. Here's what you have to know with him and the explosive potential, no matter who's throwing the ball. 9 touchdowns last year, average length 58 yards, led the country. So. Yeah, I think that's at least something. Notre Dame doesn't have that necessarily. Like if you said, all right, can Kevin Austin post a 1,188 yard 9 touchdown season on 20 yards a catch? I would have probably said no. That's too big an ask. So Florida State's got some skill talent. And I think that's kind of the one where you pay attention to most, who can really kind of hurt you anytime he touches the ball. Yeah.
And they've been also looking at the Texas A&M transfer at running back, Joshua Corbin. He's had 26 carries, but they're kind of going by committee. He's only the 3rd leading rusher. The 2nd leading rusher is actually their quarterback, Jordan Travis. It wasn't just from the game against Jacksonville State where he had 48 yards, but he was inserted for running situations as well in the first 2 games. So if they're able to augment and establish some type of any semblance of a running game, where they would be able to maybe be able to get Terry in space, take some deep shots with him, then it could be a dangerous offense there. But right now, I don't know if their running game is established enough where they can do that. Terry's got 12 catches this year for 129 yards. So that's just under 11 yards. It doesn't match. And look, defenses are going to be very wary of him. I anticipate that Kyle Hamilton will be, over the top on the coverage there to provide some help, shade over, to keep that deep ball, keep everything in front of that.
I would expect the same. Yeah, I would think that Clark Leach is not going to take any chances there, whether it's Hamilton or somebody. Don't let him beat you or bail out an offense that can't run the ball or something like that. So I kind of have two. I don't know if you'd even call it matchups, but like things to watch with these two teams. And first, I think is a quarterback run game. Like you said, Jordan Travis, second leading rusher. You know they're going to try to do that and get him involved in the running game as well. And I mean, when's the last time Notre Dame saw like that kind of offense that was legitimately a thing that would potentially present them problems or did? And we're not going to count Navy here because it's the triple option. It's a completely different thing. I mean, correct me if I'm wrong here, Lou, but you're going all the way back to the opener last year at Louisville. I mean, I know South Florida had some things they wanted to do there, but they just weren't going to score points on Notre Dame no matter what they did. So maybe it's one of those where, all right, Florida State can hit them early with that and just kind of knock them back for a minute. It's been a while since Notre Dame played, of course. All right, so what happens before Notre Dame tightens up, adjust, and it's not like, all right, you're going to get gashed by quarterback runs for 60 minutes or something that happens off of quarterback runs. But at least that's one thing I'm curious as to how much does Florida State rely on that to try to get something going, options, whatever it is, to try to create some kind of schematic edge, even if it just lasts a couple of drives.
Yeah. And number two?
Even though, I mean, we just talked about the spending the time we talked about the talent on their defense, and it hasn't showed up necessarily in the first three games, but just what if it all comes together? I mean, they have good players and guys who are going to play in the NFL. What if part of all of this is just a weird off season training camp that was limited for whatever reason? I don't know that for sure. I'm just kind of saying here. Or just something that was holding them back from peak potential or playing like you think they're going to. What if it all just comes together here and this is a low-scoring kind of slugfest where Notre Dame just can't get off to a fast start and go up 14-0 pretty quickly and really make Florida State kind of get out of what it wants to do? We haven't seen, evidence of it, but I don't know. There's still kind of that unease whenever you're playing a team that has the defensive talent individually that Florida State does.
Yeah. I think for me, that's probably the top storyline I'm looking to. I don't necessarily look at the X's and O's matchups. I try to look more at the intangibles and what's between the ears and what's inside here. And I remember the Florida State game 2 years ago when it was as freezing as it was. And I'm thinking to myself, they're not having a good season. If they fall behind early, which they did, they're just going to wilt. They're going to, fall apart, which is what happened. Notre Dame won 42-13, and you just never felt Florida State was going to be able to compete at all in that game. And it just seems that everything is so fragile there that if Notre Dame has that quick start like they did against South Florida, not like they did against Duke, but if they have that quick start, I could envision Florida State folding. and and against Jacksonville State, they fell behind 14-0. And to their credit, they rebounded well, but you can only go to that well so many times. This is a whole different caliber of team. The other part is, look, I grew up, the first major upset I saw, 1972. Notre Dame was ranked in the top 10, usual national title contender. Missouri was coming into town. Missouri had just lost to Nebraska 62-0, and they came in as a 34-point underdog. They beat an unbeaten Notre Dame team at Notre Dame Stadium. And that's when you just learn you don't take anything for granted in this game. And it's one of those where if it's like Duke, where they're hanging around for 2-3 quarters, they just might have that will at the end saying, you know what, we're pretty good. And maybe Notre Dame then starts pressing a little bit. That's what the storyline that I think interests me the most is just what's making Florida State tick right now, whether it's a time bomb or whether they're ready to detonate.
You know, it would have been a time bomb if Rockne's Roundtable existed after that Missouri loss. Yeah, I don't think that thing would have survived. Let's be real.
That would have been interesting times.
And so I'm gonna go off exactly what you said here, and I think that's absolutely something to watch. If for whatever reason Notre Dame's flat or something just doesn't work, yeah, I think it'll be at least the first thing that comes to our mind is, all right, how much did playing or 3 weeks in between game to game affect it? I don't necessarily think that's going to be a thing from first snap to final whistle, but yeah, I can see for a quarter, like, all right, this is weird. It takes you a minute. Just not playing at game speed or for 3 weeks it's a thing. You can't replicate it in scrimmage. They had one. It's nice, but it's nothing can really match that. And
Patrick, it's not just about replicating it. You had about 9 straight practices that were canceled.
Yeah,
you shut the program down. It's not like in the preseason. It's like you're getting tired of hitting each other. You're tired of seeing the same people all the time. At least you're still out there practicing. You're getting that muscle memory, etc. When you have to kind of just close it down from practicing that type of action, where it's just limited to conditioning work, that becomes the more difficult part. That's what compounds it.
Yeah, it's not like it's a bowl game where you're all doing conditioning every day or you've got your practices for 9 days, and at one point you had almost a third of your team sitting in their freaking dorm room or in isolation. And obviously this is just the reality of it. And okay, you're not going to do anything about or try to push through that and be negligent, but that's not a thing you have to try to deal with during any season. Like it doesn't happen. So yeah, I don't think we'll be coming off of this game thinking they were flat the entire time. But I could see a thing where it's a little bit like Duke, where all right, your first quarter was they went 3 and out 3 times, 0% success rate on offense. Yeah, maybe something like that happens. And just to be clear, I don't think they're losing this game or anything like that. But yeah, I mean, if we're just exploring all of the possible game scripts here, early scripts, yeah, this is absolutely something to pay attention to. And I guess on the other side of the coin, Clark Lee didn't forget how to blitz and confuse inexperienced quarterbacks. Notre Dame's offensive line didn't forget how to block people and have everything that they learned in the 2 games of getting comfortable in that new outside zone running game scheme and emphasis fall out of their ears and their brains. So it's some cases that these things matter too. And I think that'll end up winning out. And it's not like they were gone for 9 months, and the game has a way of kind of waking you up after a few drives and getting back into speed. But yeah, there's, I think, a window for Florida State to be in this thing after a quarter or halfway through the second quarter or something like that, just because. And we later learn that that's because, yeah, it was just a long layoff that's weird. So let's get into predictions. We'll get our burning questions here, and then we will give you our score predictions and bold predictions. First, a word from our sponsors. All right, Lou, you ready for some new podcast content here?
Lay it on.
So, new preview podcast staple. We're going to give you 3 burning questions that we've identified that we think is going to play some kind of a role in this game, or things that we'll be really just most curious to see. So first, Lou, we know Kevin Austin is going to play probably 15 to 20 snaps, is what Brian Kelly told us on Monday. But what's he going to do? Like, what are we going to look at and see a stat line in? Let's just say he plays 15 snaps. What's he going to do? Is this going to be a thing where he's just out there to run around, or are those going to be 15 meaningful snaps where they try to get him to do as much as he's been advised and cleared to do?
I think absolutely they're going to try to at least get the ball to him. I don't know what the snap count is going to be. Sometimes with Brian Kelly's predictions on injuries, if he says he's out 2 weeks, you think about 4 weeks or so. But so when he says 15, 20 snaps, I'm hoping for 5 or 10, maybe. And that's not criticism. That's just sometimes the pattern that's developed. But they're not sending Kevin Austin out there just to be a blocker. They want him to be able to get that feel again as far as catching. I anticipate a couple of pass receptions, and I'll even I won't reveal my bold prediction yet. That'll involve him there, but they're not just going to put him out there just so he sees the field. I think whether it's just a quick hitch or a screen, just that feeling of catching the ball in game competition is what I anticipate.
So whatever they've identified as the snap range that's acceptable for him in this recovery timeline from a broken foot or first game back from the injury, use that as much as you can, and don't throw him out there just to, like I said, just to run around. Take a shot with him. Throw a screen and see what he can do after the catch. Throw a fade in the end zone, or, okay, maybe not that, because it's some kind of 50-50 ball where see just what he can do, because we've heard all along, and now we've seen 2 games of what Notre Dame's receiving core is like without a Chase Claypool type game changer. If Kevin Austin can be that, you want to try to have him get in as many of those situations as early as possible. So as much has been allowed for him to do it. I doubt we see him early on. He's not listed as a starter. I doubt we see him on the first 3 drives. But basically, if you're going to use him, unleash him for as much as it's possibly allowed. Okay, question number 2. What happens at Buck linebacker? So on the depth chart, for what it's worth, Shane Simon, Maris Lufau, co-starters like they were for the opener. No Jack Kaiser. Doesn't mean he's not going to play. He's just not a co-starter after he had earned the game ball against South Florida. I'm a little surprised by that just because of what we saw him do against South Florida. He was great. But at the same time, I'm sure it would have been tough for Clark Lee to take Shane Simon and Maris Lufau, who beat out Kaiser, you can say, for the job at first, and just to sideline him. They haven't played a lot of football either, and they did something in training camp to at least earn that initial shot. So I'm kind of curious just what we see there. I bet we're going to see all 3, and really I'm wondering, like, all right, what are we talking about after this game at Buck? Are we thinking they found a clear starter? Is it going to be a thing where, all right, all of them are still kind of even? Or, okay, Simon or Leafau just needed another game to get comfortable like Asmar Bilal did last year? I don't know. Like I just think there's so many possibilities for what could transpire at that position in this game.
Yeah, and it could transpire that there's no action for Jack Kaiser as well.
Yeah.
In the opener against Duke, Simon and Layoff were listed as co-starters. Shane ended up with 32 snaps, and Marist ended up with 27, which that's what co-starting entails. Jack Kaiser in that game, I believe, had 4 snaps. He came in special situations, especially against the pass. He kind of had the Jack Lamb role.
Right. I think all of those were
from last season, right, in the sub packages there. So I think that's going to be a continued work in progress, and I think Clark Lee is fine with that. This is going to keep everyone engaged, and it's going to keep the competition on its toes throughout the season. I don't think Clark would have any objections to it.
I will call myself out right now for my erroneous prediction of whoever started the first game starts all games this year. That not going to happen for a number of reasons. Obviously Simon and Leafau didn't play in the Duke game they were unavailable. Just read into that what you will. I think you can infer what you want to infer. But anyway, let's get to the last one here. Will Notre Dame's cornerbacks be tested? So the early numbers are great. 21 targets between Nick McLeod, Cam Hart, Tariq Bracy, Clarence Lewis. 8 catches. None of McLeod, Bracy, or Clarence Lewis has allowed a reception for more than 15 yards. So that's exactly what you wanted to see. They've got 8 pass breakups between those 4, already 40% of the way to last year's total. That's awesome. A position that was a huge question mark is strength, but they haven't really been tested vertically. I mean, South Florida wasn't going to drop back and be able to throw it down the field. They just wouldn't be able to block Notre Dame at all. Duke didn't really try to do that either. And like we talked about, Tamorrion Terry, big play dude, big receiver. He got going, I know it was against Jacksonville State. 6 catches, 77 yards. At least, okay, there's some evidence of some kind of chemistry with Jordan Travis. Obviously, that's what you wanted to see when you put in a new quarterback. Ontario Wilson, more of a yard after catch, dangerous in that spot. An average of 5.8 yards per catch per reception for his career. He can make you miss in the open field with the ball. Not a big boundary 50-50 ball type target, but they've got some guys at receiver. So we know about the quarterback inconsistencies. Obviously, you got to see what Travis can do against a good defense. But will this be a game where a team that has a couple of good-looking receivers can actually test Notre Dame's corners down the field?
I don't think this is so much about the Notre Dame corners as it is about the Florida State offensive line and what kind of protection they can afford, whoever is at quarterback. Likely Jordan Travis, that's going to be the guy they're looking forward to. This has been an ongoing problem for 3-4 years, is pass protection at Florida State. So, it's, as Lou Holtz used to like to say, it's extremely difficult for a quarterback to be effective from a supine position where he's just laying on the ground or has to get rid of the ball constantly. And that's been an area where Florida State has been extremely vulnerable with its offensive line. You saw it against Miami, and it's been that way against Power 5 opposition. Terry is somebody, yes, who can provide that kind of threat, but overall, through 3 games this year, this has been an extremely vertically challenged offense. They're averaging only 9.9 yards on their completions. You want to get to about the 12-yard level or so, but when you break it down, I mean, it's a lot of dump-off passes to the running backs. Corbin, he's got 11 catches for 70 yards. It's just the check downs and safety valves. So whether Notre Dame cornerbacks are challenged really comes down to whether the Florida State offensive line is able to provide the type of protection that Travis is going to need against, again, a salty Notre Dame defense that also has been blitzing effectively with the linebackers.
So I think it can be a little bit of both. I don't expect Florida State to be able to consistently drop back, sit in the pocket, take shots. If they're going to happen, they're probably on some play action or some rollouts or something interesting like that. I think that's part of something Travis can reasonably do. But let's say Tamorrion Terry finishes with 2 catches or 3 catches, no touchdowns, a relatively modest stat line, and Notre Dame gets a ton of pressure. I think you can still give a lot of credit to and still be impressed or feel good about the long-term outlook of Notre Dame's corners. Because, I mean, look, Terry put up that all ACC season with all those long touchdowns with the inconsistent QB play last year and a lot of sacks. So if there's someone who can transcend a bad situation, it's him. And I think if you look at a thing where, all right, Notre Dame quieted him like the first 2 ACC teams could, I don't think it's just, oh, well, it's all because of the sacks or all because he couldn't get rid of the ball in 2 seconds. He was getting hammered. I think there'll be a lot to be encouraged about if indeed Notre Dame doesn't give up anything down the field, especially to him. He's a good player. I mean, at least he's more, I don't know if he's more proven or what the career outlook will be with him compared to, say, some of Clemson's receivers or whatever, but he's probably at least as dangerous a downfield threat as Notre Dame will see all year. All right, bold prediction time, Lou. Get ready. And you actually set me up pretty well with your mention of the offensive line. So here's what I'm going with. Notre Dame has 5 sacks this year, 2 games. They're going to match that against Florida State. And in doing that, someone's going to have 2 sacks at least. And my pick for that guy, Ade Ogundeji. Lock it in. There you go.
Well, a couple years ago, Dexter Williams was sidelined the first 4 games because of a suspension. And on his first game back, his very first carry, he went for a 45-yard touchdown, finished with 21 carries for 161 yards against Stanford. So a lot of anticipation for Kevin Austin's return. His first reception, either his first or second reception, will be a touchdown.
I like it. Ooh, getting spicy. All right. When do you think that's going to come? Late in the game, or are they going to get him out there early and just try to flex their muscle?
Second quarter.
All right. There we go. Okay. All right. You guys can hold us to these as you can the entire season.
Please don't. That's why they're called bold.
That's why it's bold. You got to keep the podcast spicy. Anyway. All right. I think we've hinted at what we kind of expect this game to be. We'll give you our score predictions. Lou, I'm going Notre Dame 34, Florida State 7. I think in our most recent magazine I put 38. I'm going to come down a little bit just in thinking, all right, long layoff. Maybe there's a couple of early drives that if they're not a 3-and-out, they kind of stall in field goal range or stall something in there. Or Florida State's defense is good enough to get a red zone stop here or there and force a couple field goal attempts, but I just don't see any way that it's a low-scoring enough game for Florida State to be a threat or that this can become anything resembling a shootout. I just don't think Florida State's going to score enough points.
Yeah. I could see it being very similar to that Duke opener where I think there becomes an antsiness or an uneasiness among the fan base of, gosh, why aren't they blowing them out like Miami, etc. That's usually natural in the course of a game. If Notre Dame does have the kind of start like it did against South Florida, then I could see the game getting out of hand quickly because I just don't know how much resolve is going to be there for Florida State. Uh, I picked it 35-10 in the addition. I might come down to that to about maybe 31-10 or so, which I guess is pushing it because the line is about 21, 22 points or so. So pushing in quote marks there. But that's what I envisioning, something reality in between. I don't think Florida State might be as bad as they were against Miami, but I don't think the season has turned around either just because they beat Jacksonville State.
No pushes allowed. Are they covering or are they not covering, Lou? What do you got? Putting you on the spot.
I gave you a score there, 31-10.
31-10? Okay. Actually, all right, you're in luck. It's 20.5. You got them covering. So do I. All right.
Oh, so it actually came down.
It did. It did. Well, maybe Vegas knows something we don't, which, okay, always possible. I don't know. I think they're covering this thing, even if it's a little bit of a slow start. So there we go. All right, Lou. Let's go watch this game. We'll be up late. Get your cold brews ready, whatever caffeine source you use for our deep nights we pull with these primetime games. What's your go-to? I'm curious.
My go-to
caffeine source when we gotta
water.
Stay deep into the night.
I don't drink sodas. Water is the only thing that quenches it.
I respect that. I've got the Starbucks double shot espressos ready to go for about midnight on Saturday, thinking when that's going to end. So, yeah, my indoctrination here into Notre Dame primetime games and putting out a magazine afterwards. Fired up. Let's go. All right. Appreciate you guys listening. Let's get out of here. As again, please rate, review, subscribe to the podcast, unsubscribe, resubscribe. And if you're watching on YouTube, please hit that thumbs up button and subscribe to our YouTube channel. Follow us on Twitter at Patrick Engel _ at BGI _ Lou Somogyi. We'll talk to you again on Monday. Talk about what happened in this game. Till then, take care.